early December 1943, Cairo, Egypt. The pen hovered over the paper as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt prepared to write words that would change the course of military history. His aide, Harry Hopkins, had just returned from a crucial conversation with General George C. Marshall, the man everyone assumed would lead the greatest military operation ever conceived. But Roosevelt could not shake a single thought that had haunted him for weeks. "I cannot sleep at night with him out of Washington." The decision was about to be made, and it would leave America's most aggressive combat general on the sidelines, while a master coordinator who had never led troops in battle would command the invasion of Europe. What none of them knew was that this choice would transform both the nature of command and the very definition of military greatness. The mathematics of supreme leadership were being calculated not in battlefield victories, but in organizational mastery that would prove more decisive than any single general's tactical prowess. The question had been building toward this moment since May 1943, when the Tunisian campaign ended with the surrender of approximately 267,000 Axis soldiers in North Africa. Among the American commanders who had distinguished themselves in that victory was Lieutenant General George Patton, Jr., a man whose name already struck fear into German hearts. At 57 years old, Patton embodied everything Americans imagined when they thought of a warrior general. He wore custom-designed uniforms with polished brass buttons that gleamed in the desert sun. Twin ivory-handled revolvers hung from his hips, not as affectation, but as weapons he knew how to use with deadly precision. His vocabulary could make sailors blush, his temperament could terrify subordinates, and his tactical prowess could destroy enemy armies with a speed that defied conventional military doctrine. Patton's path to this moment had begun decades earlier. Born November 11, 1885 in San Gabriel, California, into a family with deep military roots, young George grew up hearing stories of ancestors who had fought in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. His grandfather had been a Confederate colonel killed at the Third Battle of Winchester. This heritage shaped Patton's identity from childhood. He struggled with dyslexia, a condition unrecognized at the time, making academic work difficult. Yet he compensated with an iron will and obsessive determination. He attended the Virginia Military Institute for 1 year before entering West Point in 1904. Academic struggles forced him to repeat his first year, but he graduated on June 11, 1909, ranking 46th out of 103 cadets. Even then, his aggressive spirit and fierce competitiveness marked him as different from his peers. After graduation, Patton's career took an unusual turn when he competed in the 1912 Stockholm Olympics as part of the modern pentathlon. He finished 5th overall despite a controversial pistol shooting score that many believed should have been higher. This experience with international competition reinforced his belief in personal excellence and his conviction that America needed warriors who could match any opponent in the world. His athletic prowess combined with his social connections through marriage to Beatrice, daughter of a wealthy Massachusetts industrialist, gave him resources and opportunities that accelerated his career. Patton's first combat experience came in 1916 during the Pancho Villa expedition into Mexico, serving as an aide to Brigadier General John J. Pershing. The young lieutenant led a motorized raid against Villa's forces that resulted in the deaths of 3 of Villa's men, including one of his captains. Patton personally shot 2 men with his ivory-handled revolvers, then strapped their bodies to the hoods of his vehicles and drove back to headquarters. This action, brutal and dramatic, brought him national attention, as newspapers called him the first American officer to use motorized vehicles in combat. More importantly, it cemented his relationship with Pershing, who would become his mentor and protector for decades. When America entered World War I in 1917, Patton accompanied Pershing to France. There he found his true calling, armored warfare. The tank was a new weapon, primitive and unreliable, but Patton immediately grasped its potential. He established the United States Tank School at Langres, France, personally writing the training doctrine and operational procedures. He studied French tank tactics, interviewed British tank commanders, and developed American methods that emphasized speed and aggressive action. In September 1918, Patton led the newly formed tank corps into combat during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. He was wounded by machine gun fire while leading his tanks forward on foot, an injury that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross and established his reputation for personal bravery under fire. After the war, Patton became one of the American Army's leading advocates for mechanized warfare. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, he published articles, conducted experiments, and argued relentlessly that future wars would be won by fast-moving armored forces. He collaborated with Major Dwight Eisenhower, whom he had met in 1919 on tank development and doctrine. The two men, despite their different personalities, shared a vision of mechanized warfare that Army leadership found too expensive and too radical. Budget constraints and conservative thinking kept the tank relegated to infantry support roles. But Patton never stopped pushing for change. He designed the M1913 cavalry saber, known as the Patton Saber, and wrote extensively on cavalry tactics, always seeking ways to maintain offensive mobility in modern warfare. By 1940, as war engulfed Europe, Patton's moment had arrived. Promoted to brigadier general in October 1940, he took command of an armored brigade and began training troops in the aggressive tactics he had spent 2 decades developing. He established the Desert Training Center in California's Mojave Desert, creating a vast facility where American forces learned to fight in conditions similar to North Africa. His training methods were harsh, his standards impossibly high, but soldiers who survived his regimen became some of the Army's most effective combat units. When Operation Torch was launched in November 1942, Patton commanded the Western Task Force, landing 35,000 men on the beaches of Morocco in the first major American offensive against Axis forces. The Morocco landing showcased Patton's abilities. Despite facing Vichy French resistance, rough seas, and coordination challenges, Patton's forces secured their beachheads and pushed inland. Casablanca fell within 3 days. The Sultan of Morocco, impressed by Patton's military bearing and success, presented him with the Order of Wissam-Alaude, with a citation reading in French, "The lions in their dens tremble at his approach." More importantly, Patton demonstrated that American forces could execute complex amphibious operations and defeat determined opposition. This success earned him promotion to lieutenant general and greater responsibilities in the North African campaign. When American forces suffered their first major defeat at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, it was Patton who received the call to restore order and morale. The battle had been a disaster. German forces under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had smashed through American lines, inflicting over 6,000 casualties and destroying or capturing substantial equipment. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, the 2nd Corps commander, had proven inadequate for the task. On March 6, 1943, Patton replaced him and immediately began transforming the demoralized corps. He instituted strict uniform regulations demanding that every soldier wear a helmet and complete uniform at all times, even far behind the lines. He established rigorous schedules and inspections. He moved constantly through his units, talking to soldiers, examining equipment, checking positions. He demanded aggressive patrolling and offensive action, even when on the defensive. Within days, the change was visible. Soldiers stood straighter, responded crisper, fought harder. Patton brought Major General Omar Bradley as his deputy commander, recognizing Bradley's steady competence as the perfect complement to his own flamboyant aggression. Together, they rebuilt 2nd Corps into an effective fighting force. When American forces next engaged the Germans at Allure in late March 1943, they held their ground and counterattacked successfully. Patton had proven that American soldiers could match German veterans if properly trained, disciplined, and led. This success validated his methods and established him as one of America's most effective combat commanders. The Sicily campaign in July 1943 further enhanced Patton's reputation while simultaneously creating the crisis that would alter his future. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, saw Patton commanding the 7th Army with 90,000 men landing on the island's southern beaches on July 10, 1943. His mission was ostensibly to protect the left flank of British General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army as it drove north toward Sina. But Patton had no intention of playing second fiddle to the British. When Montgomery's forces bogged down in heavy fighting near Catania, Patton saw his opportunity. Patton launched a lightning campaign westward across Sicily, capturing Palermo on July 22 in a rapid advance that stunned friend and foe alike. Then he turned his army eastward, racing along Sicily's northern coast toward Sina, in direct competition with Montgomery. The race became personal, with both generals driving their forces hard to reach the strategic port first. Patton won, arriving in Sina on August 17, 1943, beating Montgomery by several hours. The victory was militarily questionable, as many argued Patton had chased glory instead of trapping German forces, but it established his reputation as a bold, aggressive commander who achieved objectives others thought impossible. Sicily fell in 38 days with Allied casualties totaling approximately 24,850. The campaign knocked Italy out of the war and opened the Mediterranean for Allied shipping. But amid this triumph came the incidents that would overshadow Patton's military achievements and fundamentally alter his career trajectory. On August 3, 1943, Patton visited the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia. Walking through the wards, he encountered Private Charles H. Call, a 26-year-old soldier from Indiana who had been hospitalized for what doctors diagnosed as battle fatigue or combat exhaustion. The soldier showed no visible wounds. Patton, who believed such conditions represented cowardice, demanded to know what was wrong with the man. When told the soldier was nervous and could not take the shelling, Patton exploded. He slapped Cole across the face with his gloves, called him a coward, and ordered him back to the front immediately. Medical personnel were shocked, but the incident was reported through medical channels and temporarily contained. 7 days later, on August 10th, Patton visited the 93rd Evacuation Hospital. There he encountered 21-year-old Private Paul G. Bennett, another soldier diagnosed with battle fatigue. Bennett had served effectively in combat for 4 years, but had reached his breaking point. When Patton asked what the trouble was, and Bennett replied he guessed he could not take it, Patton's rage exceeded even his first outburst. He slapped Bennett twice, once so hard that the soldier's helmet liner flew off. Then Patton drew one of his ivory-handled revolvers, waved it at Bennett's head, and threatened to shoot him right there for cowardice. He called Bennett a coward repeatedly, then ordered medical personnel to return the soldier to the front or file charges against him. The doctors and nurses present were horrified, with several submitting reports detailing the general's actions. These reports reached Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, now commanding 2nd Corps, who locked them in his safe out of loyalty to his former commander. But separate reports went through medical channels to the Surgeon General's office, eventually reaching General Dwight Eisenhower on August 16th. Eisenhower faced an agonizing decision. Patton was arguably the Allies' most effective combat general, a man whose tactical abilities and aggressive spirit were considered essential for future operations. But he had assaulted subordinates, threatened to execute a soldier, and violated both military law and basic human decency. The incidents revealed a character flaw, an inability to control his temper that raised serious questions about his fitness for high command. Eisenhower chose a middle path. He sent Patton a scorching letter dated August 17th, stating that while firm measures were sometimes necessary, this does not excuse brutality, the abuse of the sick, nor exhibition of uncontrollable temper in front of subordinates. Eisenhower ordered Patton to apologize personally to both soldiers, to the medical personnel who witnessed the incidents, and to every division in his army. Patton complied. Though the apologies were painful and humiliating, he visited each division, admitted his actions were wrong, and asked for understanding. Many soldiers respected his willingness to admit error. Others lost faith in him. But the incidents remained secret outside military channels until November 21, 1943, when radio broadcaster Drew Pearson revealed the slapping incidents to the American public. The reaction was explosive and divided. Some Americans supported Patton, arguing that war required hard commanders who did not tolerate weakness. Others were appalled, viewing the slappings as evidence of brutality and unfitness for command. Members of Congress demanded explanations. Secretary of War Henry Stimson and Army Chief of Staff George Marshall came under intense pressure to either defend Patton or remove him from command entirely. The controversy reached just as the most important command decision of the war was being made. That decision involved not just Patton but also two other extraordinary military leaders whose careers had taken very different paths. Dwight David Eisenhower had been born on October 14, 1890 in Dennis, Texas, into a family of modest means. His father worked as a mechanic at a quarry, and young Dwight grew up in Abilene, Kansas, in circumstances far humbler than Patton's privileged upbringing. Eisenhower attended West Point not from military passion, but because it offered a free college education. He graduated on June 12, 1915, ranking 61st in a class of 164 cadets. That class, later called the class the Stars Fell On, would produce 59 generals. But in 1915, Eisenhower seemed an unlikely candidate for greatness. Eisenhower's early career was marked by frustration. When America entered World War I, he desperately wanted combat command, but the Army assigned him to train tank units at Camp Colton, Pennsylvania. He proved exceptionally good at training and organization, establishing an effective tank school that prepared thousands of men for combat. But he never got overseas. The war ended before he could deploy, leaving him feeling he had missed the defining experience of his generation. After the war, he reverted to his permanent rank of captain, then was promoted to major, but advancement seemed glacially slow. In 1919, Eisenhower participated in the Army's Transcontinental Motor Convoy, a 2-month trek across America that demonstrated the terrible condition of American roads. This experience, combined with his tank training, convinced him that future wars would require mobile, mechanized forces and good infrastructure. He met Major George Patton that same year at Fort Meade, Maryland, where both men were assigned to tank units. Despite their vastly different personalities and backgrounds, they became friends and collaborators. They spent hours discussing tank tactics, experimenting with equipment, and writing articles advocating for armored warfare. Their superiors, however, remained committed to traditional doctrine, and both men faced criticism for their radical ideas. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Eisenhower's career progressed through a series of staff assignments that showcased his organizational abilities while keeping him far from combat commands. He attended the Command and General Staff School at Fort Leavenworth, graduating first in his class of 275 officers in 1926. This academic success brought him to the attention of senior officers who valued staff work and strategic thinking. He served as a speechwriter and aide to General John J. Pershing, helping the aging general write his memoirs. He worked under Brigadier General Fox Connor in Panama, where Connor became his mentor and shaped his understanding of coalition warfare and military history. Connor told Eisenhower that another world war was inevitable, and that when it came, America would fight as part of an alliance, probably alongside Britain and France. In 1933, Eisenhower became an aide to General Douglas MacArthur, then Army Chief of Staff. The relationship was difficult. MacArthur was imperious, brilliant, and convinced of his own genius. Eisenhower, more modest and practical, often found himself smoothing over conflicts MacArthur created with Congress and the Roosevelt administration. When MacArthur went to the Philippines in 1935 to build that nation's defense forces, Eisenhower accompanied him as his assistant. The 6 years in the Philippines from 1935 to 1939 were frustrating professionally but educational. Eisenhower learned diplomacy, navigating the complex relationships between American military advisors, Filipino politicians, and MacArthur's enormous ego. He learned that military operations required political support, that coalition warfare demanded compromise, and that patience and tact often achieved more than confrontation. When Eisenhower returned to the United States in 1939, war had already begun in Europe. His career accelerated rapidly as the Army desperately needed experienced staff officers to manage expansion and mobilization. He impressed everyone with his organizational abilities, his clear thinking, and his capacity for sustained hard work. In 1941, he participated in large-scale military exercises in Louisiana that showcased the Army's growing mechanized capabilities. His performance caught the attention of General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, who was building a network of talented officers to manage the coming war. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Marshall summoned Eisenhower to Washington and assigned him to the War Plans Division. Eisenhower's first assignment was to develop a strategy for the Pacific Theater. He worked exhausting hours, often sleeping in his office, producing clear, practical plans that impressed Marshall. In February 1942, Marshall promoted Eisenhower to head the War Plans Division, making him responsible for strategic planning across all theaters. Eisenhower advocated for a Europe-first strategy, arguing that Germany posed the greatest threat and that defeating Hitler must be the Allies' priority. His clarity of thought and his ability to see the big picture while managing complex details made him indispensable to Marshall. In June 1942, Marshall sent Eisenhower to London as commanding general of the European Theater of Operations. It was an extraordinary promotion for a man who had never commanded troops in combat. But Marshall recognized that Eisenhower possessed unique skills for coalition warfare. Eisenhower's mission was to establish American forces in Britain, maintain alliance cooperation, and plan for an eventual invasion of France. He proved masterful at working with the British. He established rapport with Winston Churchill, gained the trust of British military leaders, and created an integrated Allied headquarters where American and British officers worked side by side. His diplomatic skills, his willingness to compromise on minor points while maintaining firmness on essentials, and his genuine belief in Allied cooperation made him remarkably effective. When Operation Torch was launched in November 1942, Marshall chose Eisenhower as Supreme Allied Commander despite his lack of combat experience. Torch was politically complex, requiring coordination with French forces of uncertain loyalty while managing British and American commands with different strategic priorities. Eisenhower handled the political complications brilliantly, negotiating ceasefires with French commanders, managing the volatile situation around Admiral Francois, and keeping Allied forces focused on defeating the Germans. The campaign succeeded, and Eisenhower's reputation grew. He had proven he could command a coalition in combat operations, even if he personally never led troops in battle. The third man central to the command decision was George Catlett Marshall, born December 31, 1880 in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Marshall came from a family with Confederate sympathies, his father having been a businessman in Virginia before moving to Pennsylvania. Young George attended Virginia Military Institute, graduating in 1901 as first captain of the Corps of Cadets. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry and spent the next 15 years in various assignments that prepared him for high command without anyone recognizing his exceptional abilities. Marshall's first significant opportunity came in World War I when he served as a staff officer with the 1st Infantry Division in France. He demonstrated extraordinary skills in planning and logistics, particularly in organizing the movement of large forces during complex operations. At the Battle of Cantigny in May 1918, the first major American offensive, Marshall's meticulous planning contributed to success. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive, he coordinated the movement of over 600,000 troops and 2,700 guns, one of the largest military movements in history. General John J. Pershing recognized Marshall's abilities and kept him close as operations officer, giving him responsibilities far beyond his rank. After the war, Marshall spent 2 decades in various assignments that built his reputation within the Army while remaining unknown to the public. He served as aide to Pershing, taught at the infantry school at Fort Benning, where he trained a generation of future commanders, and worked in various staff positions that showcased his organizational mastery. He impressed everyone with his integrity, his judgment, and his ability to identify talented officers. He kept a small black notebook where he recorded names of promising young officers, a list that would later provide commanders for World War II. Officers like Omar Bradley, Matthew Ridgway, Joseph Stilwell, and Dwight Eisenhower all came to Marshall's attention years before they became famous. In 1939, President Franklin Roosevelt made the extraordinary decision to promote Marshall over dozens of more senior officers and appoint him Army Chief of Staff. Roosevelt had recognized that the coming war would require not just a military commander, but an organizer who could work with Congress, manage a vast expansion of the armed forces, and coordinate with allies. Marshall took office on September 1, 1939, the same day Germany invaded Poland. The timing was providential. America's army at that moment numbered approximately 174,000 men, ranking 17th in the world, smaller than Belgium's army. The forces were poorly equipped, inadequately trained, and organized for a war that no longer existed. Marshall transformed the American military over the next 6 years through a combination of political skill, organizational genius, and iron determination. He cultivated relationships with Congress, testifying frequently and honestly about military needs. He won massive appropriations for expansion, equipment, and training. He established new training centers across the country, created new divisions, and oversaw the induction and training of millions of men. He promoted talented officers rapidly, bypassing seniority when necessary to put the right commanders in the right positions. He coordinated with the Navy despite inter-vice rivalries. He managed relationships with difficult Allied leaders, particularly Churchill, whose strategic vision often conflicted with American priorities. Most importantly for the war's outcome, Marshall became the primary advocate for a cross-sea invasion of France. From 1942 onward, he pushed relentlessly for a direct assault on German-occupied France as the fastest route to defeating Hitler. Churchill preferred a peripheral strategy, attacking through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and the Balkans, what he called the soft underbelly of Europe. Marshall argued this was strategically unsound, diverting resources from the main effort and prolonging the war. He fought battles within the American military, with the Navy demanding more resources for the Pacific. He battled British planners who remembered the slaughter of World War I and feared another Western Front bloodbath. He finally secured Roosevelt's commitment to a cross-channel invasion in 1943 with a target date of May 1944 for the operation named Overlord. Having conceived the operation, advocated for it relentlessly, and finally secured its approval, Marshall seemed the logical choice to command it. He was America's most respected military leader. Churchill called him the organizer of Allied victory. Stalin trusted him. Roosevelt relied on him absolutely. The British would accept him as supreme Allied commander despite their preference for one of their own commanders. Pershing, now in his 80s, wrote to Roosevelt urging Marshall's appointment. Members of Congress expected it. Military historians assumed it. Marshall himself, however, never campaigned for the position. When asked his preference, he consistently replied that the president must decide what was best for the country, not what was best for George Marshall. Roosevelt faced an agonizing choice. Marshall deserved the command. His strategic vision had shaped the Allied strategy. His organizational abilities were unmatched, but Marshall's value in Washington was irreplaceable. He coordinated the global war effort across multiple theaters. He managed relationships with Congress, ensuring continued support and appropriations. He worked with the British chiefs, the Navy, and difficult personalities like Douglas MacArthur, who commanded in the Pacific. He maintained the industrial mobilization that provided weapons and supplies. Admiral Ernest King and Admiral William Leahy, members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, strongly opposed removing Marshall from Washington, arguing that no other officer could perform his essential functions. The conferences in Cairo and Thrin in November-December 1943 brought the decision to a head. Stalin demanded to know who would command Overlord, suspecting Anglo-American delays and wanting assurance that the invasion would actually happen. Churchill supported Marshall but privately worried about losing such an effective coalition manager. Roosevelt wrestled with the decision, torn between rewarding Marshall's service and maintaining his irreplaceable contribution in Washington. He sent Harry Hopkins to Marshall in Cairo during the first week of December to gauge his preference. Marshall refused to state one, saying only that he would support whatever decision Roosevelt made wholeheartedly. Roosevelt then invited Marshall to a private meeting on December 5, 1943. According to Marshall's later recollection, Roosevelt, after considerable hedging, asked directly what Marshall wanted to do. Marshall gave the same answer. Personal feelings could not matter when the issue was too important to the nation. Roosevelt reportedly replied, "I feel I could not sleep at night with you out of the country." The president had made his decision. Marshall would remain as Army Chief of Staff, coordinating the global war. Someone else would command Overlord. On December 7, 1943, exactly 2 years after Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt informed Eisenhower of his appointment. The message was characteristically brief and informal. "Well, Ike, you are going to command Overlord." Eisenhower was stunned. He had assumed Marshall would receive the command and had been preparing to return to Washington to take over Marshall's position as Chief of Staff. Now he faced the greatest military responsibility in history. That same day, Marshall wrote a note to Stalin and Churchill informing them of Eisenhower's appointment. Marshall sent Eisenhower a copy with a brief handwritten message. "Dear Eisenhower, I thought you might like to have this as a memento. It was written very hurriedly by me as the final meeting broke up yesterday. The president signing it immediately. GCM." The decision made profound sense once its logic became clear. Overlord was not primarily a tactical operation requiring battlefield genius. It was the most complex organizational challenge in military history, requiring coordination of forces from multiple nations with different command structures, strategic priorities, and tactical doctrines. The operation would involve over 3 million men, nearly 7,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and countless supporting elements. Success would depend on diplomatic skill in managing alliance politics, organizational mastery in coordinating complex movements, strategic vision in seeing how tactical operations fit into larger objectives, and the ability to make subordinates from different nations work together effectively. Eisenhower possessed exactly these qualities. His natural charisma made him universally liked. British troops trusted him. Churchill respected him despite their occasional disagreements. Even Charles de Gaulle, notoriously difficult and suspicious of Anglo-American intentions, found Eisenhower acceptable. Eisenhower's strategic thinking encompassed not just military operations, but political consequences, economic factors, civil affairs, and public opinion. He understood that modern war was as much political as military. He had proven in North Africa and Sicily that he could manage complex coalitions under combat conditions. Most crucially, he had developed a leadership style that made subordinates feel valued while maintaining absolute authority. He listened to criticism, admitted mistakes, and learned continuously. These qualities made him ideal for supreme command of a coalition where unity of effort mattered more than tactical brilliance. As Eisenhower established his headquarters in London in January 1944, he immediately confronted challenges that validated Roosevelt's judgment. The first involved command structure. The initial plan developed under British Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan called for a 3-division assault on a narrow front. Eisenhower, reviewing the plan, immediately recognized it as inadequate. He insisted on expanding to 5 divisions, landing on a broader front, giving more flexibility, and reducing vulnerability to German counterattack. This expansion required more landing craft, more air support, more supplies, all of which were in short supply. Eisenhower had to negotiate with Churchill, with the combined chiefs of staff, and with naval commanders to secure the resources needed. His diplomatic skills and his ability to make compelling arguments won agreement for the expanded operation. The second challenge involved ground commanders. British General Bernard Montgomery would command all ground forces during the initial assault, including both British and American armies. This arrangement pleased the British, but created resentment among some American generals who viewed Montgomery as cautious and arrogant. Eisenhower made the system work by clearly delineating responsibilities, giving Montgomery operational control during the landing phase while planning to shift authority to American commanders once the breakout occurred. He managed Montgomery's difficult personality, deflected criticism, and kept the coalition functioning effectively. The third and most sensitive challenge was Patton. Despite the slapping incidents, despite the controversy, despite the public outcry, Eisenhower and Marshall both recognized that Patton's combat skills would be essential once mobile warfare began. The question was what to do with him. Until that moment arrived, Eisenhower's solution demonstrated strategic creativity. Patton would command Third Army, which would be activated only after the invasion succeeded and a breakout occurred. Until then, Patton would serve as the centerpiece of the most elaborate deception operation in military history. Operation Fortitude was conceived to mislead German intelligence about where and when the invasion would occur. The concept was simple. Make the Germans believe the main invasion would strike Pascal, the narrowest point of the English Channel, and the obvious choice for a cross-channel assault. The Allies would actually invade Normandy, which offered better beaches and room for maneuver, but the Germans must continue believing Calais was the target even after Normandy landings began. This deception required creating a fictional army that appeared to be preparing for invasion. The Phantom Force was designated First United States Army Group, abbreviated FUS. It existed only on paper, in fake radio transmissions, in dummy equipment positioned around Dover and southeastern England, and in reports from German spies who were actually British double agents. But FUSAG needed a commander whose appointment would seem logical and whose reputation would make the threat credible. There was only one choice. Patton, sidelined by controversy but recognized by Germans as the Allies' most dangerous combat commander, became FUSAG's commander in early 1944. The Germans accepted this completely. Their intelligence services, the EB and the SD, devoted enormous resources to tracking FUS. They photographed dummy landing craft built from scaffolding tubes and canvas. They intercepted radio transmissions from mobile units simulating 11 non-existent divisions. They received reports from agents who were actually under British control through the double-cross system. Most convincingly, they saw Patton touring installations, giving speeches, meeting with subordinate commanders. Every bit of intelligence confirmed that Patton commanded a massive force preparing to strike Calais. German commanders believed the deception because it made strategic sense. Calais offered the shortest sea crossing, only 20 meters compared to Normandy's 100 miles. Calais provided the most direct route to Germany and the vital Ruhr industrial region. Most importantly, they knew Patton was the Allies' best tactical commander. German Field Marshal Georg von Rundstedt, when later asked about Allied commanders, stated that Patton was your best. Erwin Rommel had studied Patton's tactics in North Africa. Hitler reportedly called him that crazy cowboy general, a mixture of dismissal and grudging respect. German logic dictated that the Allies would use their best combat commander for the main invasion, not a secondary operation. Therefore, wherever Patton was, the main invasion would come. The deception included one particularly audacious element. General Hans Kramer, who had commanded a panzer division in North Africa before capture in May 1943, was being repatriated due to poor health. Before his departure in May 1944, British intelligence arranged for him to dine with Patton. Throughout the evening, Patton, presented as Fussegi commander, mentioned Calais and invasion preparations. Afterward, Kramer was driven through southern England, passing enormous troop concentrations. Road signs indicated he was in southeastern England near Dover. In reality, he was in southwestern England seeing actual overlord preparations. But the deception was perfect. When Kramer reached neutral Sweden and reported to German intelligence, he confirmed everything the Germans already believed. Patton commanded a huge force preparing to invade at Calais. While Patton played his role as decoy, Eisenhower worked exhausting days preparing the actual invasion. He moved his operational headquarters to Telegraph Cottage outside London, where he could focus without constant interruptions. He personally visited every division scheduled to participate in the assault, speaking to soldiers, projecting confidence, building trust. By June 1944, he had visited all American, British, and Canadian assault units, often spending hours talking with men who would carry out his orders. Soldiers responded to his genuine warmth and obvious concern for their welfare. They saw not a distant commander, but a leader who understood what he was asking them to do. Eisenhower also made the hardest decisions a commander faces. He approved the airborne assault despite predictions of 70% casualties for paratroops dropping behind enemy lines. He understood the risk but recognized that without airborne forces securing the invasion flanks, the entire operation might fail. He wrestled with weather as D-Day was originally scheduled for June 5, but terrible storms forced postponement. His meteorologists predicted a brief improvement on June 6, followed by more bad weather. If the invasion did not go on the 6th, it would need to wait 2 weeks for proper tides and moon phases, or possibly until July. The delay would compromise security and give Germans more time to strengthen defenses. Eisenhower made the call, go on June 6. He later wrote that it was the loneliest decision of his life. On the evening of June 5, as troops loaded onto ships and aircraft prepared for takeoff, Eisenhower visited the 101st Airborne Division at their airfield near Newbury. These paratroopers would drop into Normandy hours before dawn, securing bridges and road junctions. Their casualties were expected to be severe. Eisenhower walked among them talking quietly, joking about fishing, asking about hometowns. A photographer captured an iconic image. Eisenhower speaking with Lieutenant Wallace Strobel, whose face showed the tension all soldiers felt. After the visit, Eisenhower returned to headquarters and wrote a message accepting full responsibility if the invasion failed. He carried it in his pocket, ready to release it if needed. The message read, "Our landings have failed, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." June 6, 1944, dawned with clearing skies over the English Channel. At 6:30 in the morning, American, British, and Canadian soldiers stormed 5 beaches across 50 miles of Normandy coastline. The assault involved nearly 7,000 vessels, including warships, landing craft, transports, and support ships. Over 11,000 aircraft provided air support. By day's end, approximately 156,000 Allied soldiers had landed in France. Casualties totaled roughly 10,000, with Omaha Beach accounting for most American losses, where fierce German resistance nearly threw attackers back into the sea. But the invasion succeeded. By midnight, Allied forces held their beachheads. The liberation of Western Europe had begun. Eisenhower's careful planning and diplomatic skills had produced success. The expanded assault front prevented German forces from concentrating against a single point. The airborne drops, despite heavy casualties and scattered deployment, confused German commanders and delayed reinforcements. Naval gunfire provided crucial support to struggling infantry. Air superiority prevented German aircraft from attacking vulnerable ships and troops. Most critically, the deception worked perfectly. As fighting raged in Normandy, Hitler refused to commit his armored reserves, convinced the real invasion would still come at Calais. The German 15th Army remained near Calais, waiting for Patton. For 7 weeks after D-Day, substantial German forces stayed at Calais instead of reinforcing Normandy. British double agents, particularly Juan Pul Garcia, codenamed Garbo, continued sending messages through German intelligence networks describing Fusag's preparations and explaining why the Calais invasion was delayed. Hitler believed these reports. He kept armored divisions that might have crushed the Normandy beachhead, waiting for an invasion that would never come. The Allies had hoped the deception might buy them 2 weeks. It bought them 7. Every German division at Calais was one fewer in Normandy, a strategic advantage worth dozens of tactical victories. Patton learned of the Normandy invasion like everyone else by listening to BBC radio on the morning of June 6. He was devastated. Despite understanding his role in the deception, despite knowing his importance to the plan, he felt he was missing the greatest military operation in history. He wrote to his wife, Beatrice, "It is hell to be on the sidelines and see all the glory eluding me, but I guess there will be enough for all." To his son, George, at West Point, he wrote, "This group of unconquerable heroes whom I command are not in yet, but we will be soon. I wish I was there now, as it is a lovely, sunny day for a battle, and I am fed up with just sitting." But Patton's absence was his greatest contribution. His reputation alone, his role as phantom commander of a fictional army, tied down German reserves and convinced Hitler that Normandy was a diversion. It was history's greatest irony. Patton achieved his most strategically important victory in a battle where he played no active role. His near reputation, exploited brilliantly by Allied intelligence and Eisenhower's strategic vision, accomplished more than any tactical maneuver. On August 1, 1944, after 2 months of fierce fighting in Normandy, Patton's Third Army officially became operational. The moment he had waited for had arrived. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, had finally broken German defensive lines west of St. Lo. Through that breach poured Patton's armored divisions in a campaign of speed and aggression that stunned the German high command. Patton employed tactics he had spent decades developing. His forces moved faster than German commanders thought possible, appearing in unexpected places, surrounding enemy units before they could react. The Third Army's advance across France became legendary. Patton's forces raced west into Brittany, then wheeled east toward Paris, then turned northeast toward the German border. By August 25, American troops were entering Paris. By month's end, Third Army had liberated most of Brittany, closed the Fields Gap, trapping German forces, and captured dozens of towns and thousands of prisoners. Patton's armored divisions advanced so rapidly that airborne units complained he kept overrunning their planned drop zones. In 30 days, Third Army covered ground that planners had estimated would require 6 months. The advance finally halted at the end of August when supply lines simply could not keep up. Gasoline consumption exceeded delivery capacity by enormous margins. Eisenhower faced a strategic choice. He could concentrate all available fuel and supplies on Patton, letting Third Army drive deep into Germany while other forces marked time. Or he could distribute resources across a broad front, allowing all Allied armies to advance steadily, but preventing any single deep penetration. Eisenhower chose the broad front strategy, believing it safer and more likely to achieve lasting success. Patton was furious, convinced he could have reached Berlin by Christmas if given supplies. The debate over broad front versus narrow thrust would continue for decades, but Eisenhower's decision reflected his strategic responsibility for the entire campaign, not just a single army's success. In December 1944, Eisenhower's strategic judgment was tested when Germany launched its final major offensive. Hitler had secretly assembled forces for a massive attack through the Ardennes forest, gambling everything on a desperate attempt to split Allied armies and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. On December 16th, 3 German armies struck American lines held by thinly stretched forces. The attack, later called the Battle of the Bulge, created a crisis requiring Eisenhower's finest performance as supreme commander. Within hours, Eisenhower was organizing the Allied response. He recognized immediately that the German attack, while dangerous, represented an opportunity if handled correctly. German forces were advancing beyond their supply lines, exposing themselves to counterattack. Eisenhower rushed reinforcements to threatened sectors, gave ground where necessary to preserve forces, and coordinated American, British, and French units to contain the penetration. Most crucially, he turned to Patton with an assignment that seemed impossible. The 101st Airborne Division was surrounded at Bostonia, a critical crossroads town. If Bostonia fell, German forces could push westward toward Antwerp. Eisenhower needed Patton to disengage from his current operations, pivot Third Army 90 north, and attack into the southern shoulder of the German Bulge to relieve Bostonia. On December 19th, Eisenhower met with Patton and Bradley at Verdun to coordinate the response. When Eisenhower asked when Patton could attack, Patton replied he could move on December 22nd. Eisenhower, skeptical that an entire army could redeploy so quickly, called the estimate fatuous. But Patton was not exaggerating. He had anticipated this possibility. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Cole, had predicted the German offensive through careful analysis of enemy movements. Patton had already directed his staff to prepare contingency plans. When he returned to headquarters in Nancy, he simply called his chief of staff and gave the code word for the operation they had already planned. Third Army executed one of the fastest and most complex maneuvers in military history. Patton attacked on December 22nd, driving 3 divisions north through blizzards and frozen ground toward Bostonia. Despite terrible weather, despite German resistance, despite supply challenges, Third Army kept moving. On December 26th, elements of the 4th Armored Division broke through to Bostonia, linking with the surrounded paratroopers. Reinforcements followed. By January's end, Allied forces had pushed German troops back to their start lines. The Bulge had been eliminated. Germany's last gamble had failed. The Battle of the Bulge showcased the perfect combination of Eisenhower's strategic coordination and Patton's tactical execution. Eisenhower organized the entire Allied response, allocated resources, made strategic decisions about where to defend and where to counterattack. Patton provided aggressive tactical leadership, accomplishing what others thought impossible. Together they formed an unbeatable team, each contributing essential elements to victory. By March 1945, Allied forces were crossing the Rhine and driving into Germany. On March 1st, Third Army captured Trier, prompting a famous exchange. When Eisenhower's headquarters sent a message suggesting Patton bypass Trier because capturing it would require 4 divisions, Patton replied, "Have taken Trier with 2 divisions. Do you want me to give it back?" The message typified Patton's aggressive confidence and his willingness to achieve objectives others considered too difficult. From March through May, Third Army raced across Germany, They liberated the Ohrdruf concentration camp, the first camp liberated by American forces. Patton forced local German civilians to tour the camp and witness Nazi atrocities. His forces captured vast numbers of prisoners linked with Soviet forces advancing from the east and penetrated deep into Czechoslovakia before orders halted their advance. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Third Army had compiled an extraordinary combat record. From August 1, 1944 to May 8, 1945, Patton's forces had liberated or conquered approximately 81,500 square miles of territory across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. They had captured roughly 1.28 million prisoners and inflicted an estimated 500,000 casualties on German forces. Third Army's own casualties, while significant, were lower proportionally than other Allied armies, validating Patton's philosophy that aggressive offense saved lives by destroying enemy forces before they could organize effective resistance. Yet, it was Eisenhower's leadership that made all of this possible. His organizational mastery planned and executed the invasion. His diplomatic skills held the fractious coalition together through countless crises. His strategic vision guided operations from Normandy to the Ulle River. His ability to manage difficult personalities, from Montgomery's arrogance to de Gaulle's prickly nationalism to Patton's impulsiveness, prevented conflicts that might have crippled the alliance. His willingness to make hard decisions, from approving high-risk operations to choosing invasion timing to coordinating responses to unexpected crises, proved him the ideal supreme commander. The question of why America's best combat general was sidelined from leading D-Day had been answered through the operation's very nature. Overlord did not require a battlefield tactician. It required a coordinator, a diplomat, a strategic thinker who could manage the most complex military operation ever attempted. Patton was indeed America's finest tactical commander, perhaps the greatest of the war. But Overlord required different qualities. It needed someone who could orchestrate coalition warfare, balance competing national interests, think strategically about operations spanning continents, and maintain trust across governments and military services. Eisenhower possessed these qualities in abundance. Patton did not. The slapping incidents, far from being unfortunate but minor mistakes, revealed character flaws that made Patton unsuitable for supreme command. His inability to control his temper, his tendency toward impulsive decisions, his lack of political awareness. These traits might be acceptable in a corps or army commander, but were disqualifying for a supreme commander navigating diplomatic complexities and maintaining political support at the highest levels. Roosevelt's choice of Eisenhower over Marshall demonstrated even greater wisdom. Marshall would have been an excellent supreme commander. His organizational skills were unmatched. His strategic vision was profound. His reputation was impeccable. But Marshall's true value lay in Washington, where he coordinated the global war effort, managed congressional relations, balanced multiple theaters, and maintained the political and logistical support that made victories possible. Removing Marshall to send him to Europe would have solved one problem while creating another. Eisenhower in Europe and Marshall in Washington proved the optimal combination, and Patton, despite being sidelined from supreme command and from D-Day itself, found his ideal role. His tactical genius and aggressive spirit were exactly what mobile warfare required once the invasion succeeded. Third Army's performance vindicated every claim about Patton's abilities. He was indeed America's greatest combat commander, the general whose name struck terror into German hearts. But he served under Eisenhower, executing a strategic vision developed by both Eisenhower and Marshall, playing his part in a comprehensive plan that required different skills at different levels. The legacy of this command decision extended far beyond World War II. Eisenhower's success established new principles for modern military leadership. He proved that contemporary warfare requires not just tactical brilliance, but organizational excellence, political awareness, diplomatic finesse, and strategic vision. These qualities became standards for senior military leadership in subsequent decades. The American military's emphasis on joint operations, coalition warfare, and strategic thinking over purely tactical prowess can be traced directly to lessons learned from Eisenhower's success. Eisenhower leveraged his military reputation into political success, serving as President of the United States from 1953 to 1961. His presidency reflected the same qualities that made him an effective supreme commander: organizational competence, strategic thinking, coalition building, and to navigate complex situations without losing sight of larger objectives. He ended the Korean War, managed Cold War tensions without nuclear escalation, and established policies that guided American strategy for decades. His presidency demonstrated that skills required for supreme military command translated effectively to supreme civilian leadership. Patton never had that opportunity. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, he became military governor of Bavaria. Within months, he created new controversy: his reluctance to aggressively pursue denazification, his statements suggesting former Nazi party members could serve in administrative roles, and his suggestions that the Allies should immediately confront the Soviet Union brought criticism from Washington and the press. Eisenhower, sensitive to political pressures, removed Patton from Third Army Command in October 1945. On December 8, 1945, Patton was severely injured in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany. His staff car collided with an American truck, and Patton suffered a broken neck that left him paralyzed from the neck down. He was taken to Heidelberg Hospital, where doctors could do nothing for his injuries. 12 days later, on December 21, 1945, Patton died from pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure. He was 60 years old. He was buried in the American Military Cemetery in Luxembourg among the soldiers he had commanded. His grave is marked with a simple white cross identical to those of the men who served under him. Marshall continued in public service after the war, serving in roles of extraordinary responsibility. President Truman appointed him special envoy to China in 1945, attempting to mediate between nationalists and communists. The mission failed, but Marshall gained insights into Asian affairs that shaped American policy. In 1947, Truman appointed Marshall as Secretary of State. In that role, Marshall proposed the European Recovery Program in a speech at Harvard University on June 5, 1947. The program, quickly named the Marshall Plan, provided massive American aid to rebuild Western Europe's devastated economy. Over 4 years, the United States provided over $12 billion in assistance, helping 16 European nations recover from war's destruction. The Marshall Plan prevented economic collapse, created prosperity that undercut communist appeal, and established American leadership in the post-war world. It was arguably as important to winning the peace as Overlord had been to winning the war. Marshall served briefly as Secretary of Defense during the Korean War, then retired in 1951. In 1953, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for the Marshall Plan, becoming the only professional soldier ever to receive that honor. He died on October 16, 1959, at age 78 at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. President Truman attended the funeral and later said Marshall was the greatest living American. The relationship between these three extraordinary leaders, Eisenhower, Marshall, and Patton, defined Allied victory in World War II. Each contributed essential elements that complemented the others. Marshall provided strategic framework and global coordination from Washington. Eisenhower provided organizational execution and coalition management in Europe. Patton provided tactical excellence and offensive capability at the Army level. No single one could have achieved victory alone. Together, with each serving where his unique talents had maximum effect, they formed an unbeatable combination. Roosevelt's wisdom in recognizing what role each should play proved decisive. The decision to sideline America's best combat general from leading D-Day was correct by every measure. D-Day succeeded through flawless organizational execution, not tactical genius. The invasion required coordinating millions of details across multiple services and nations. It required diplomatic skill to manage coalition tensions. It required strategic vision to integrate the invasion into the broader war effort. It required patience to wait for ideal conditions and courage to proceed when conditions were merely adequate. These were Eisenhower's strengths. Patton's strengths emerged later when breakthrough-enabled mobile warfare where aggressive tactics determined outcomes. Using Patton as a deception before D-Day and as a combat commander afterward demonstrated perfect understanding of how to employ each general where his abilities would have maximum impact. The mathematics of Allied victory were calculated not in terms of who was the best fighter, but who was the best coordinator. Not who could win battles, but who could manage the complex enterprise of coalition warfare. Not who struck fear into enemy hearts, but who maintained trust among fractious allies. By these measures, Eisenhower was the only choice for supreme command. Patton was indispensable as a tactical commander. Marshall was indispensable as strategic coordinator. But for the specific challenge of planning and executing D-Day, then managing the campaign from Normandy to Berlin, Eisenhower possessed precisely the right combination of skills. In choosing Eisenhower over both Marshall and Patton, Roosevelt demonstrated strategic thinking that characterized his wartime leadership. He understood that military organizations, like all complex human enterprises, required different capabilities at different levels. Qualities making an outstanding company commander differ from those needed at division level. Qualities making an excellent corps commander differ from those required at army level, and qualities needed for supreme command are different still. Roosevelt recognized that overlord required supreme organizational and diplomatic capabilities more than supreme tactical abilities. He chose accordingly. The result was the liberation of Western Europe and the defeat of Nazi Germany. On June 6, 1944, when Allied soldiers stormed Normandy beaches, they did so under command structure that perfectly matched capabilities to requirements. Eisenhower's organizational excellence had planned every detail. His diplomatic skills had maintained coalition unity. His strategic vision had identified the right approach. Marshall's support from Washington had provided resources and political backing. Patton, serving as a deception in England, had tied down German reserves through reputation alone. When Patton finally entered combat 2 months later, his tactical excellence exploited opportunities Eisenhower's planning had created. The greatest military operation in history succeeded because Roosevelt made the right command decision. America's best combat general was sidelined from D-Day, not through any failing, but because the operation required different excellence. In choosing Eisenhower over Patton for supreme command, Roosevelt recognized that winning modern wars requires matching appropriate skills to specific challenges. Patton earned his glory in the breakout across France, in Bastion's relief, in the drive through Germany. But D-Day belonged to Eisenhower, whose organizational mastery, diplomatic capability, and strategic vision enabled the 20th century's greatest military achievement. The decision to sideline Patton was not rejection but recognition that supreme command required different talents. Talents Eisenhower possessed in exceptional measure. Both men serving where their unique abilities had maximum effect contributed decisively to Allied victory. The wisdom of Roosevelt's choice was proven by results. Europe's liberation, Nazi tyranny's defeat, and establishment of democratic peace enduring 8 decades. That legacy stands as testament to the principle that great leadership requires not just courage and tactical skill, but wisdom to place the right person in the right role at the right time. Roosevelt possessed that wisdom. His decision to sideline Patton from leading D-Day while giving supreme command to Eisenhower changed military history and shaped the modern